Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
Welcome back to Battles of the American Civil War. Behind the battles, moving on with some more generales. This time for the Confederacies. And things might have gone different if this guy didn't get killed early on in the war, but...
Right. When he died, he thought the South was going to win it. Because they were kicking ass at that point.
Right. Also, probably the best general at this time when he died. Albert Sidney Johnston, he was the head guy at the time of his death of the whole Confederacy, our military, obviously.
Right.
With widely being regarded as, like I said, the best general in all of armies at this time. He's also a general in 3 different armies, which was the Texian Army, the United States Army, and obviously the Confederate States Army. So good for him. He saw extensive combat, 34-year military career. He fought in the Black Hawk War, the Texas Indian Wars, the Mexican-American War, the Utah War, and, of course, the Civil War, where he died on the battlefield at the Battle of Shiloh.
Damn.
He sure did. He was born in Washington, Kentucky, the youngest kid of Dr. John Johnson and Abigail Harris. His dad originally came from Salisbury, Connecticut. His old granddaddy, Edward Harris, he was a legit Revolutionary War patriot.
Damn.
Even though Albert started life in Kentucky, Texas. All my exes. Oh, that's not it. But I want in my hat in Tennessee. Okay, never mind. Texas is where he really put down his roots and called it his home. As a youngin', Albert went to Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky. That's where he crossed paths with old Jefferson Davis, who we already know about him.
Right.
Two of them ended up at West Point. And Albert, he graduated in 1826, 8th out of a class of 41.
Well, that's nice.
He walked away with a commission as a brevet second lieutenant in the 2nd U.S. Infantry.
Look at that shit. After West Point, Albert, he got sent to post in New York and Missouri. August 1827, he was part of this expedition to deal with the Redbird. He was a Winnebago chief who'd been stirring things up and pissing the old government off. Albert, he was really struck by this guy. He later wrote about how Redbird was one of the most dignified and noble men he'd ever met. Redbird said something like, I messed up and I'm giving myself up to save my people. That left a great impression on Albert.
He said, if it's going to save my people, I'll go with you.
Good for you, bud.
Well, then 1832 rolls along and Al, can we call you Al? He gets pulled into the Black Hawk War, which didn't last very long. He served as chief of staff for Brevet Brigadier General Henry Atkinson. And let me tell you what, Atkinson, he was impressed. He went on record saying Albert had talents of the first order.
Ooh.
He called him a gallant soldier with top-notch education and a real gentleman with his high integrity.
Nice.
That kind of praise will do you some good in the old Army world.
Sure in hell will. Back in 1829, Albert married Henrietta Preston, whose brother William Preston was a big deal in Kentucky politics.
Aren't they all?
And later, he became a Civil War general.
For who?
Kentucky, Friday North. Albert and Henrietta
You think so?
had 3
I
kids.
think so.
But sadly, only 2 of them made it to adulthood, as happens.
What? 2 out of 3.
All right. 66%, baby.
Kentucky soldier, the brigadier general in the Confederate Army. With the old feds, huh?
Oh, wow. Anyway, like we mentioned, they had 3 kids, but only 2 of them made it to adulthood. One of them, their son, William Preston Johnson, grew up to be a colonel in the Confederate Army.
Awesome.
Which is a whole story in itself, which we'll get to.
We'll probably get to eventually.
Things took a tough turn, though, in 1834. Henrietta got really sick with tuberculosis. Oh, fuck. Albert made the hard call to resign his military commission so he could be by her side in Kentucky. He was a devoted husband, and he had to take care of his wife. Heartbreaking, but she passed away 2 years later. Hit him hard.
I bet it did.
Didn't know what to do.
Well, after that, Albert, he picked up, moved on, took on a big role as Secretary of War for the Republic of Texas from 1938 to 40. Once he wrapped that up, he headed back to Kentucky. In 1843, he found love again, and he married Eliza Griffin, who was actually Henrietta's first cousin. That happens. 2 of them decided to start fresh in Texas, settling on a big plantation in Brazoria County, which Albert, he named it China Grove.
Oh.
There, they raised the 2 kids from his first marriage. Plus, they had another 3 they had together. Look at them.
Look at that shit.
Later on, they had a 6th child after the family moved to Los Angeles, where they put down permanent roots. Go to Los Angeles. Kind of a In the 30s, nothing there.
Right. 1836, Albert packed up, headed to Texas. Right after the Texas War of Independence, when they broke away from Mexico. He didn't just sit around, though. He jumped in and listened as a private in the Texian Army. But this guy wasn't staying at the bottom for long. By the 5th of August, 1836, he'd been named Adjutant General with the rank of Colonel in the Republic of Texas Army. January 31st, 1837, promoted again, this time Senior Brigadier General, putting him in charge of the whole Texas Army. Look at this guy.
Well, as is usual, not everyone was thrilled about his rise. February 5th, 1837, Felix Houston, he was a Texas Brigadier General who'd been acting commander. He got real mad about Albert's promotion. He took it personally, like he was getting slapped in the face by the Texas government. He said, I've been here the whole time. This guy just waltzes in from California.
Right.
So he challenges Albert to a duel.
Ooh.
They faced off. It didn't go well for Albert, though. He got shot in the hip, badly wounded. He did step down from his post while he recovered.
Later, Albert opened up about it, saying he only fought Houston because he felt it was his duty. He wasn't a fan of dueling, thought it was kind of pointless. But he believed the Texas Army needed discipline and an order, and Houston was this wild, lawless figure who needed to be checked. Albert saw it as putting the Republic's safety first, even if it meant risking his own neck. Years later, Houston himself looked back and regretted the whole thing. He called it a shameful piece of business. He never, ever, ever, ever would do it again. He felt awful. He said it tainted all the good he's done in his life. But he couldn't exactly challenge the government or the president. So Albert, he was the target. He was just glad he didn't kill the man.
Well, fast forward December 22nd, 1838. Mirabeau B. Lamar, the second president of Texas. He tapped Albert. He wanted him to be his Secretary of War.
Damn right.
In that row, he was out there protecting the Texas border from Mexicans. They were trying to take back the rebellious state.
Good luck.
1839, he also got involved in the Cherokee War in northern Texas, campaigning against Native Americans, I would assume.
Right.
During the Battle of Neches, both Albert and Vice President David Burnett, they got shout-outs in the commander's report for their active exertions on the field.
Nice.
And for carrying themselves in a way that brought them a lot of respect. By February of 1840, though, Albert, he's ready to take a break.
Yeah.
He resigned his post, headed back to Oak, Kentucky.
When the United States declared war on Mexico in May of 1846, Albert, he didn't even hesitate.
He's like, yes!
He rode 400 miles from his home in Galveston to Port Isabel to volunteer for Zachary Taylor's Army of Occupation. He got elected colonel of the 1st Texas Rifle Volunteers, but right before the Army marched on Monterey, his soldiers' enlistments, they said, no.
Our time's up, buds.
Right. Still, Taylor saw his potential and made him Inspector General for Brigadier General William Butler's Volunteer Division. Albert, he even persuaded a few of his old regiment buddies to stick around and fight.
At the Battle of Monterey, things got intense. Butler, he got wounded and had to be carried off. So Albert, he stepped up, taking a real leadership role. Joseph Hooker, we'll get to him later. Not today.
Right.
He was there, and he couldn't stop talking about Albert's cool-headedness. He said Albert basically saved their division from a bloodbath with his magnificent presence on the field. Mm-hmm. Taylor himself went as far as to calling Albert the best soldier he ever commanded.
Oh, that's nice.
But after Monterey, October 1846, Albert, he calls it quits again. He said he told his wife Eliza he'd only serve for 6 months, and he's a man of his word, damn it.
Ooh. Plus, the politics didn't help. President James Polk's administration was playing favorites, handing out officer roles to Democrats while sidelining guys like Albert, who were seen as Whigs. It was a raw deal. Polk appointed a bunch of Democrats who'd never seen a battlefield, while West Point grads like Albert, proving himself in Texas, and had top-notch military chops. Got nothing. Taylor,
Good day, sir.
Right. Taylor even wrote to Polk, begging him to give Albert command of one of the new regiments. But the letter didn't even get a reply. Albert's brother, Josiah Stoddard Johnston, he was tight with the Whig leader Henry Clay, and that probably didn't help his case with the old Democrats.
Probably not.
So Albert said, "F this. We're going back to his plantation."
Yeah. Well, he stayed there until 1849 when Zachary Taylor, he's now the 12th president, he brought him back. Taylor, he appointed him a major in the U.S. Army, making him a paymaster for a Texas district stretching from the upper Colorado River to the upper Trinity River. For over 5 years, Albert, he's out there making 6 tours a year, covering more than 4,000 miles on the Indian frontier.
Oh.
He served at places like Fort Mason and others in the West, always on the move.
Good for him, right? 1855.
Yeah, if you guys can't hear, some asshole decided to cut his grass at the same time we record this, so.
1855. Franklin Pierce, 14th president. He made Albert colonel of a brand new 2nd United States Cavalry, which later became the 5th U.S. That regiment was stacked. His second in command, Robert E. Lee.
No.
Majors, William Hardy, George Thomas.
They all go to the Confederacy.
And a roster full of future Civil War generals like Earl Van Dorn, Edmund Kirby Smith, John B. Hood, and others. Albert helped build that unit from the ground up. And by the 31st of March, 1856, he got a temporary gig. He was commanding the entire Department of Texas once again. He didn't mess around, leading aggressive campaigns against the Comanche.
Ooh.
He wrote to his daughter about how the Indians were harassing the frontiers. But him and his 2nd Cavalry and other troops were giving them a thrashing whenever they caught up to him. You should just see the slaughter we did to those women and children. In March of 1857, Brigadier General David Twiggs took over as permanent commander. And Albert, he said, I'm going to go back to the 2nd Cavalry. Might as well.
All right, November 1857, he gets pulled into the Utah War, taking charge of the U.S. forces sent to squash a rebellion by the Latter-day Saints.
Oh, wow.
Their mission, it was to replace Brigham Young with Alfred Cumming as the governor of Utah Territory.
Good luck.
And reestablish U.S. authority. Albert stepped in and took over for Brigadier General William Harney, and he joined the Army late since it was already on its way to Utah. He said, I'll catch up with you guys.
Right.
His adjutant general, John Fitzporter. I thought it was John
John Porter.
Right. John Porter, who'd later be a Civil War general, yes, couldn't say enough of good things about him. Look at this guy getting praised by everybody.
Nice.
Porter, he wrote, Albert's experience on the plains, his energy, and his guts brought calm to a chaotic situation.
All right.
But the wagon train was a mess, all tangled up. Albert got it moving smoothly again. People were freaking out, but he steadied them. Shh, calm my children.
Just a people whisperer. Over the next few months, Albert, he was grinding it out at Fort Bridger, Wyoming, keeping his army sharp in the brutal winter. Porter, he was impressed, writing to a friend that Albert did everything possible to keep the troops ready and uphold the country's honor.
I thought it was time to fucking betray it, but
right. He was adamant that no one should outrank Albert ever, saying every man in this camp wanted him to be promoted to brigadier general. Even the Mormons gave him props.
That's cool, dude. He deserves another wife.
Right. The Deseret News in Salt Lake City wrote that it took a cool head and a sharp judgment to keep an army content and a camp healthy through a stormy winter in the Wasatch Mountains. That's not faint praise from folks on the other side.
It's not. They know what it's like.
Right.
Well, Albert and his men, they're now itching for a fight. They want to do something. They'd heard about the Mountain Meadows Massacre and were fired up for payback against the Mormons.
Oh.
But in the end, they didn't go that way. After enduring the harsh winter at Fort Bridger, the whole peace deal was struck. They're like, damn it, we can't kill these motherfuckers no more.
Right.
By late June 1858, Albert led his army through Salt Lake City without a hitch and set up Camp Floyd about 50 miles away.
Okay.
In his report to the War Department, he didn't hold back, saying some horrible crimes had gone down in Utah. Stuff so bad it was hard to wrap your head around. Oh. No one had been held accountable.
Jeez.
Still, his army kept the peace. Winfield Scott, we'll get to him. I'm surprised we haven't got him yet.
Right.
He's the U.S. Army's top dog at this point. He's thrilled with Albert's work, and he pushed for his promotion to Brevet Brigadier General, calling him a godsend to the country.
No.
The Senate, they made it official March 24th, 1858. He's a two-time general.
Albert, he also had a knack for dealing with the Native American tribes.
Yeah, just slaughter them all.
Porter said he made a point of bringing chiefs into camp, treating them with kindness, but staying firm and dignified. Tribes like the Utes, the Paiutes, and the Bannocks they visited, they left happy, promising to be friendly as long as Albert was around.
You stay around, Al.
As long as you're here, bud, we won't scalp anybody. He even undercut the Mormons' influence over them, making sure travelers to California and Oregon were safe. Yeah, Mormons hated Indians. Things got murky, though, in August of 1859. Parts of Albert's Army of Utah were tied to an alleged massacre at Spring Valley, supposedly in retaliation for an Indian attack on an immigrant train. Details are shaky, but Albert only mentioned it in November 1859 report to Scott.
Just mentioned it briefly. Oh, by the way, he did say 3 immigrant groups were robbed. About 10 or 12 people, including men, women, and children. They're all killed. A detachment under a Lieutenant Gay severely chastised the group's robbers. but the culprits behind the other attacks slipped away.
Oh.
Albert, he suspected they were rogue Shoshone or Bannock bands, maybe led by white men, since the chiefs denied any involvement.
Right.
They wouldn't lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only real account comes from Elijah Nicholas Wilson, written way later in 1910, plus some oral histories. So nobody really knows what actually happened.
Right. Late February 1860, Albert, he got orders to head to Washington, D.C. for a new assignment. He spent most of that year in Kentucky and then sailed to Cali on December 21st.
Sailed?
To take over the Department of Pacific. In spring of 1861, he sent a small unit to patrol northern California after reports of Native American raids on settlers. He was clear with his officers. No reckless killing. No mixing up the guilty with the innocent. And after that, things stayed quiet. Albert, he was always about keeping the balance. Tough when he needed to be, but he was also fair.
Yeah, good.
The guy, he just had a way of getting things done.
Getting things done. All right.
That's nice.
Before we dive into his Civil War time, let's take a look at his views on slavery.
Oh.
His eldest son once said his dad's views on slavery were pretty typical for the South.
Okay.
It's just the way things were for millions of people down there. Yeah. Part of the social fabric he grew up in. 1846, records show Albert owned 4 slaves in Texas. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to 1855, he ran into a situation where one of his slaves was stealing from the Army payroll. Oh no.
Fuck.
Instead of resorting to physical punishment, Albert chose to sell the man for $1,000 to cover the losses.
Oh.
He explained it by saying whipping wouldn't undo the theft or change the guy.
Right.
He hadn't turned honest despite years of decent treatment anyways. Right. That gives you a sense of how I handled things. Practical, not cruel, but still very much a man of his time.
Right.
It would just happen to, own human beings.
Yeah, what are you going to do? 1856, Albert, he wrote to his son, and you can hear the heat in his words.
Ooh, ouch.
He called abolitionism fanatical, idolatrous, Negro worshiping, he said. And he was worried that abolitionists were going to stir up a slave revolt across the South.
Oh, don't worry, they're going to do more than that.
Right. It's clear that he saw their movement as a threat to the world he knew. When he moved to California, his actions show some nuance. He sold 1 slave to his son, but there was another, Randolph Hughes. Folks called him Ran. This is Albert. He's like, you can go free, Ran. Run. Run, Ran.
Run, Ran. Run.
But
Ran.
Right. But Ran, he's like, I'll stick with the family under a deal, about $12 a month for 5 more years of work.
Good for you, bud.
That arrangement held. And Ran stayed by Albert's side throughout the Civil War, right up until Albert's death.
Oh, good guy.
It's a complicated picture, though. Albert was shaped by the South system. He was defensive of it, but he also made choices that hinted a bit of flexibility, at least in his own way.
Okay, guy. Well, when the old Civil War kicked off, Albert, he was running the show as commander of the U.S. Army's Department of the Pacific out in Cali.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like a lot of Southern-born regular Army officers, he wasn't keen on secession, didn't like the idea of the country splitting up.
Right.
But when he got word that the Confederate States were declaring independence, he made a tough call, resigned his commission, and the War Department accepted it on May 6, 1861.
Right.
They backdated it, though, to May 3rd. Mm-hmm. By April 28th, he'd moved to L.A., where his wife's brother John Griffin lived.
Wow. Albert thought about staying put in California with his wife and 5 kids. Actually make that 6 since their youngest was born in their L.A. home. Life could have been quiet there, but that wasn't Albert's path. Tragically, his eldest son, Captain Albert S. Johnston, Jr., he died a couple of years later in 1863. He was caught in an accidental explosion on a steamer ship while on leave in L.A. Wow.
Oh, poor guy.
By May, Albert made up his mind. He joined the Los Angeles Mounted Rifles, which was a pro-Southern militia, signing on as a private.
Yeah, this dude didn't even care. He's a general and shit, and he said, I'll go back as a private.
And on 27th of May, he left Warner's Ranch with the militia. He trekked across the scorching southwestern deserts to Texas.
Back to old Texas. They crossed the Colorado River into the Confederate territory of Arizona, July 4th, 1861. The guy leading his escort, Alonzo Ridley, he was the undersheriff of L.A. and stuck by Albert's side until the end.
Oh.
When Albert got to the Confederacy, he was 58. Pretty old for our Army. Got pretty old at all right there, let alone to be in the Army.
Yeah.
He showed up in Richmond on September 5th, 1861, after that grueling cross-country trip with no promises, just hoping for a role.
Mm.
Well, at this time, old President Davis, he's trying to hold as much territory as possible, spreading his forces along the borders and coasts. He said, we Can't lose territory, and we need to gain some if possible.
Mm-hmm. That very summer, Davis picked generals to defend the lines from the Mississippi River to the Allegheny Mountains, the trickiest spots along the Mississippi and in western Tennessee, where the Tennessee and the Cumberland rivers were key. That went to Major General Leonidas Polk and Brigadier General Gideon Pillow. Pillow had been Tennessee's top general at first, but things get messy.
Of course.
Because on the 3rd of September, 1861, just 2 days before Albert reached Richmond, Polk and Pillow made a bold move. They occupied Columbus, Kentucky. They weren't supposed to.
We all know Kentucky is neutral.
That was a mistake. Kentucky had been trying to stay neutral, but their action pushed the state toward the Union.
It did.
Most Kentuckians sided with the U.S. and gave Union Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant the perfect excuse to seize Paducah.
Paducah, and he sure did.
Without even ticking off the state's pro-Union majority or legislature.
They're like, hey,
Yep.
these guys came first.
Mm-hmm.
September 10th, 1861, Albert, he got a massive assignment from the Confederacy, in which he was put in charge of pretty much everything west of the Allegheny Mountains except the coastal areas. They called it the Western Department or the Western Military Department.
Makes sense.
And it was a huge chunk of territory.
Okay.
His old friend Jeff Davis, who thought the world of him, had already pushed through his appointment as a full general. He said,
Fantastic.
get this guy out there.
The Confederate Senate confirmed it 31st of August, 1861. Backdating his rank to May 30th.
Oh, damn. Gets paid all that, huh?
Right. That made Albert the second highest ranking general in the Confederate Army. Just behind old Samuel Cooper. He was the adjutant general and inspector general. Right after the appointment, Albert didn't waste any time. He headed straight for his new territory, ready to take on the challenge. He was given the green light to call up new troops from the governors of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. But as usual, politics got in the way, especially with Mississippi. So that didn't go so smoothly as he had hoped. Still, he got to work.
September 13th, he sent Brigadier General Felix Zollicoffer with 4,000 men to hold Cumberland Gap in Kentucky, blocking Union troops from slipping into eastern Tennessee.
Oh.
This was a big move, especially since Kentucky's legislature had just thrown in with the Union after Polk's blunder in Columbus that we already talked about. Stupids. A few days later, September 18th, Albert, he had Brigadier General Simon Bolivar Buckner and another 4,000 men stationed at Bowling Green, Kentucky. He said, go cut off the railroad route into Tennessee. He was stretching his forces thin, but putting where it counted.
Right. Well, Albert, he was working with less than 40,000 men, scattered all across Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri. Out of that, 10,000 were in Missouri under Sterling Price with the Missouri State Guard. When Albert asked the governors for more recruits, he didn't get the flood of volunteers he needed. What was worse, he was critically short on weapons and ammo for the troops that he already had.
Then you want more.
Oh, wow. The old rebel government was pouring most of its resources into the Eastern armies, leaving Albert with scraps, barely any reinforcements or supplies. So guess what? He's like, I can be creative. So he did. He kept up a steady stream of raids and maneuvers, making it look like he had way more men than he did. The bluff worked for months, keeping the Union guessing and at bay as well.
And we already know the Union. They already think you got twice the army they have anyways. His tactics drove Union Brigadier General William Tecumseh Sherman absolutely up the wall in Kentucky. Sherman, he got so spooked, overestimating Albert's forces, that he started unraveling, acting paranoid and unstable. By November 9th, 1861, the Union replaced him with Brigadier General Don Carlos Buell and said, you got to get out of here, buddy. Well, later on, Sherman pushed back hard on that story in his memoirs, but at the time, Albert's mind games did have him rattled, according to everybody else. Albert, he's out there holding the line with not nearly enough men or gear, but still managed to keep the Union on their toes. Kind of leader he was. That's why they loved him. That's why old Jeff said he was the best.
Right. East Tennessee, it was a tricky spot for the old rebels. During the Civil War, most folks were pro-Union, which made holding it a headache. Jefferson Davis, he put 2 brigadier generals in charge, Felix Zollicoffer and George Crittenden. And Crittenden was soon bumped up to major general.
Good for him.
Zollicoffer was brave but green. No real training or experience. Crittenden, a former United States Army officer, had his own issues, with whispers about him hitting the bottle too much.
Don't they all?
Right. This is not exactly the dream team the old rebels thought they had.
Well.
While Crittenden was off in Richmond, Zollicoffer, he made a bold move. He took his forces to the north bank of the Upper Cumberland, near Mill Springs, Kentucky, which is now called Nancy.
Nancy, Kentucky.
Yeah, Nancy.
Well, problem was he was parked with his troops at the river at their backs, basically trapping them. Well, he'd been ordered to pull back to the other side, but he claimed he couldn't because transport was scarce and Union troops were too close. When Union Brigadier General George Thomas started moving in, Crittenden, now back in the picture, he decided to hit one part of Thomas's split-up command at Logan's Crossroads before the Union forces could link up. January 19th, 1862, at the Battle of Mill Springs, the Confederates soaked from a night march in the rain. They came out swinging and had some early success. Well, we just put out the full Battle of Mill Springs by itself on the old YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. Well, but things fell apart fast. Zollicoffer, he got killed. The Union hit back with a bayonet charge that sent the Confederates running. Their 4,000-man force took a beating, losing 533 of them. Crittenden's leadership was such a mess that some of his own men accused him of being drunk on the job. The survivors were scattered to other unions, and Crittenden ended up under investigation for his conduct. What a disaster. Old Zollicoffer is gone.
Oh, no. After that loss, Jefferson Davis tried to patch things up with Albert. He sent a brigade and some scattered reinforcements. And he also sent General P.G. Beauregard. He's like, here's this.
P.G. Beauregard.
He was a big name, thanks to his early war wins. Beauregard was supposed to draw in recruits and be a solid right-hand man for Albert. But as usually things seems to go. The brigade was led by Brigadier General Floyd, who had a reputation for being pretty useless. Floyd ended up in charge at Fort Donelson, just as the old blue coats, Brigadier General Ulysses Grant, came a-knocking. Word got around that Beauregard was bringing 15 regiments, which spooked the old blue coats and probably pushed them to hit the forts before he could settle in. That number was exaggerated, though.
As usual.
Beauregard didn't have nearly that many men as they thought.
Jeez.
That's usually what happens, so I can't believe Grant fell for that.
Well, they all are at this point. Well, Tennessee, they were banking on Kentucky's neutrality to act as a buffer against a Union invasion from the north, but that plan fell apart by September of 1861. The state had sent a bunch of troops to Virginia early on and focused its defenses on the Mississippi Valley. Even before Albert showed up in Tennessee, they started building two forts, which Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and Old Fort Donelson on the Cumberland.
Was that an old Indian chief? Two forts?
Two forts.
Two forts.
Probably. Yeah, they wanted to block Union access from the north, clearly. Problem was, they built these forts in Tennessee to avoid stepping on Kentucky's toes, and the locations weren't great.
Yeah, what do you get?
Ended up getting pummeled by old Grant.
Fort Henry was in a low spot. Easy pickings for hills across the river in Kentucky.
I mean, when you're shooting down, shooting fish in a barrel.
Fort Donelson, it was better situated, but it had a weak land side, and not even enough big guns to fend off Union gunboats as well. Major General Leonidas Polk, when he took charge, he brushed off the fort's issues. He's like, nah. Once Albert stepped in, he ordered Polk to send an engineer. He's like, who do we got? Oh, Lieutenant Joseph Dixon. Why don't you tell him to come check him out? Polk was like, sure, I'll get to it. He dragged his feet, but Albert, he put his foot down. And Dixon got to work.
He said, no, we're going to do it now.
Right. He said, come on, man.
Well, it's just like Albert thought. Dixon, he said the forts weren't perfect, but too much effort had gone into them to abandon them.
Right.
And the Confederates might not have time to start over, so we got to do what we got to do. Albert, he went with his advice. He wanted Major Alexander Stewart to run the forts, but Jefferson Davis, he picked Brigadier General Lloyd Tillman instead. To keep Polk from spreading his forces thin, some of his men were itching to join a partisan group. Albert, he ordered him to send Brigadier General Gideon Pillow with 5,000 men to Fort Donelson. So we'll give you a little bit more.
Right. Pillow, he set up in nearby Clarksville, Tennessee. He didn't even move into the fort until the 7th of February, 1862. After a Union reconnaissance on January 14th tipped him off, old Albert, he told Tickman, he said, hey, I want you to fortify that high ground across from Fort Henry. Something Polk had ignored. But Tillman, he didn't act fast enough. And honestly, the orders came way too late anyhow to make even a difference. You're there, you're not, doesn't fucking matter.
February 4th, General P.G.T. Beauregard, he showed up at Albert's headquarters in Bowling Green, and he took charge of Polk's forces at the western end of the line in Columbus.
Kentucky. 2
days later, February 6th, Union gunboats, they tore through Fort Henry's defenses like they were nothing, killing or wounding 21 of the small Confederate force left there. Tillman then surrendered his 94 remaining men out of about 3,000, since most had been at Fort Donelson. And that was before Grant's troops could even get in position. He said, I don't want to fight at all. Albert, he knew if Fort Donelson fell, he'd be stuck in Bowling Green, so he started moving up to Nashville.
Okay.
And that happened on February 11th. He said, We're going to get captured, too, if we don't get out of here.
Right. Gotta go.
Fuck these forts. I told you guys at the beginning.
Albert, he also poured 12,000 more
Apparently
men.
not.
Right. He also poured 12,000 more men in Fort Donelson, including Floyd and Pillow's troops, which was a head scratcher since he thought the old Bluecoats gunboats could take the fort on their own. He told the commanders to pull out if the fort couldn't hold. But Floyd and Pillow says, I got 12 kids each. I ain't pulling out nothing.
Do I look like I pull out?
But Floyd and Pillow, the senior generals, they botched it.
Exactly why they got 12 kids.
They missed their chance to avoid his surrender. On 16th February, Brigadier General Simon Buckner left high and dry after Floyd and Pillow bailed.
No.
They had to give the fort up. Fort Donelson, no more. Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest, sharp as ever, he slipped out with the 700-man cavalry before even the surrender happened. He said, I'm out, boys. The old rebels lost 1,500 men, 12,000 to 14,000 taken prisoner.
Jeez.
Union losses, 500 killed, 2,108 wounded, and 224 missing.
Still a lot killed.
Yeah.
Well, Albert, he had to take the heat for Fort Donelson's fall. Clearly, he was the guy. He didn't have much choice but to let Floyd and Pillow take charge based on their seniority.
Right.
And explaining the full mess to the public would have shown how shaky the Confederate position was.
Yeah, it was bad.
People started calling for his head, and historians later piled on, pointing how he spread his forces too thin and didn't pull them together when the Union advanced. And he leaned on some pretty questionable subordinates as well.
Oh.
His defensive stance, sitting in a forward spot like Bowling Green, that didn't help either.
No, son of a bitch.
The loss of the forts left Nashville wide open for the pickings. And that, too, fell to Union Brigadier General Don Carlos Buell February 25th, just 2 days after Albert had to pull his men out to avoid them getting captured.
Damn.
Talk about a brutal stretch for Albert, and it's about to get brutal, even more brutal, because he's not about to last very long here.
No doubt. After Fort Henry Donelson fell, gone, adios amigos, no more occupido, Albert, he was in a real bind. He had barely 17,000 men left.
That's crazy.
Staring down a massive Union force that could steamroll him. He made a quick...
Well, they probably think he's got 34,000.
Right. He made a quick call to pull back, hightailing it south from Nashville into Mississippi and then northern Alabama. He personally led the Army of Central Kentucky, his core group, out of Nashville area to avoid getting trapped.
Good for him.
With General Beauregard's help, Albert came up with a plan to regroup at Corinth, Mississippi, a key spot where railroads cross, perfect for staging a defense.
He took a roundabout route to get there, keeping the Union forces, which is now under Major General Henry Halleck, guessing and slow to react. That bought him enough time to slip into Corinth without being spotted.
Right.
And then to beef up his numbers, he pulled in reinforcements from Louisiana, which was part of Polk's troops from Island Number 10, and 10,000 more men under Braxton Bragg, who came up from Mobile.
Engine number 9 going to Island number 10. Right.
Bragg's arrival was a relief for Beauregard and Polk, who were starting to panic, and they were feeling outnumbered and outgunned before Albert showed up March 24th, 1862.
Uh-oh.
Finally.
Right. By the time Albert got to Corinth, 17,000 men that he had, combined with the forces already there, gave him a total of 40 to 44,000 troops. Holy shit.
Like that's how it's 40,000 to 44,669 troops. So how do you get that exact? Two about that.
On the 29th of March, he officially took command of this mixed force. Which kept the name of the Army of Mississippi, something that Beauregard had organized back on the 5th of March.
Good for you.
Albert knew his only shot was to hit Ulysses S. Grant's army very hard and fast before Grant could even link up with Brigadier General Don Carlos Buell's reinforcements. So, on the 3rd of April, 1862, he got his army moving, aiming to catch Grant off guard the next day at Pittsburgh Landing, and we did that very battle.
Sure did. Well, as usual, it wasn't smooth sailing. His army was a patchwork, thrown together in a hurry. 2/3 of them had never seen combat. The whole operation was a mess. Divisions tripping over each other because of lousy drill, discipline, and planning. Beauregard, he thought the attack was a bad idea, flat out doomed. But Albert, he wasn't hearing it. He said, it's our only chance. He said, I would fight them if they were 1,000,000. And he pushed his men towards Grant's position. By the evening of April 5th, his army was in place, with just a mile or two from Grant's force, and the Union Army had no idea they were even coming.
Okay.
Albert, he was betting everything on this surprise, ready to throw the dice. He said, that's all we got left, boys.
Ready to throw that damn dice. 6th April, 1862. Albert launched a huge surprise attack against Ulysses S. Grant's army. The Battle of Shiloh. His forces came crashing into the Bluecoats' camp, catching them off guard.
Sure did.
Albert was right in the thick of it, riding his horse up and down the line, rallying his men. There was this moment that really stood out. He caught some of his soldiers, including the young lieutenant, breaking ranks to loot the Union camps. Albert said, "Oh, hell no." He shouted out, "None of that, sir. We're not here for plunder."
No, we're just here to shoot people in the face.
Right. Realizing he called the guy out, he softened the blow by grabbing a tin cup off a table and saying, "Let this be my share of the spoils today," before pushing his men forward.
No, he didn't want to,
Right.
He wanted them to keep fighting, so, all right.
I'll grab this cup here.
Around 2:30 p.m. While leading a charge near a spot called the Peach Orchard, they took a turn, and they're for the worse. A bullet hit him behind his right knee, nicking his popliteal artery.
Oh, no.
His boot started filling with blood, and there was no doctor around. Albert had sent his personal surgeon to tend to wounded Confederate troops and Union prisoners earlier. Uh-oh. Within minutes, his staff noticed him slumping in the saddle, looking deathly pale.
Yeah, he's bleeding out like a son of a bitch.
Isham Harris, the Tennessee governor, who basically stopped governing after Lincoln appointed Andrew Johnson as military governor, he was right there next to him. And he said, "General, are you wounded?" Albert glanced at his leg, then said in a faint voice, "Yes, and I fear seriously." Those were his last words.
Man, this dude,
Blood in his boot.
a stupid shot to the leg, man. It's just retarded. That's why everybody's like, cops are going to shoot you in the leg. This is exactly why you don't.
Right.
Holy
How many major arteries are in your freaking leg?
Damn. His men pulled off his horse.
Well, he would have survived.
If they could have had something there.
Right.
His men pulled him off his horse, carried him to a small ravine near the hornet's nest, trying to help, but he'd already passed away.
He's done.
Harris sent for he already passed out. Harris sent for the surgeon, but didn't think to tie a tourniquet. You idiot. A few minutes later, Albert was gone, bled out before a doctor could even get to him. Even if they put a tourniquet on, he lost so much damn blood.
Would have stopped it at least. They could have cut off his leg or done something.
Still got to give him blood. Did they even do that back then?
Who knows?
Jeez. That's terrible. They later found a tourniquet in his pocket.
Oh.
Such as a small thing that could have made a difference.
So they obviously knew to use them. Just nobody thought to, apparently, huh?
He might have hung on for up to an hour after the wound. To keep the troops' spirits up, Harris and the others wrapped Albert's body in a blanket so the men wouldn't see their dead general. Damn, dude. That's just insanely stupid.
Well, they then took him and his wounded horse, Fire Eater, to his field headquarters in the Corinth Road, where his body stayed in his tent for the rest of the battle. Beauregard, he took over and kept the Confederate attack going, pushing the Union back to a final line near the Tennessee River. By 7 p.m., with his horse worn out, with his men worn out and darkness falling, Beauregard, he called off the assault, planning to finish the job the next morning. But overnight, Grant, he said, "I'm getting 20,000 fresh troops from Don Carlos Buell." And the next day, his counterattack drove the Confederates off the field, winning the battle.
Yep.
And putting the Confederates in so much, panic, they just lost their best general right here.
Insane. As the old rebels fell back to Corinth, Albert's body was taken to the home of Colonel William Inge, his former headquarters.
Oh, no, Brandon.
They draped it in the Confederate flag and laid it in state for a few hours. There's a chance the fatal shot came from a Confederate soldier itself.
Isn't it always?
Albert was charging way ahead of them, and plenty of the Confederates were firing toward the Union lines. Alonzo Ridley.
Well, it makes sense. He got shot in the back of the leg, and if he was charging ahead of them.
Right. Alonzo Ridley, who led Albert's bodyguard, the Guides, was right there when he fell. Albert's death hit the Confederacy hard. He was the highest ranking officer ever to die in the war on either side. And Jefferson Davis, who saw him as the best general they ever had, felt the loss deeply. It was a gut punch to the South morale, losing a leader like that at such a critical moment in the war.
Tide's about to start turning here. Not only was he the highest ranking general to die in the Civil War, he's the highest ranking American general to die ever.
Right. Insane.
Yeah. Well, when Albert died, he left behind his wife Eliza and their 6 kids. Eliza, along with her 5 younger children. including the other one that was born after Albert headed off to war, never even met him. They decided to stay in L.A., living with their brother, Dr. John Strother Griffin. Albert's eldest son, Albert Sidney Jr., born back in Texas, he followed his dad into the Army. 1863, Albert Jr. was in L.A. on leave. He caught a ferry out of San Pedro Harbor. As a steamer was picking up passengers from the ferry, a wave hit, swamping the smaller boat and causing its boilers to explode. As you would have guessed, old Albert Jr., he didn't make it.
Crazy.
Damn, dude.
Crazy, man. That's insane. After Albert's death, the old rebel government gave him the highest praise they ever dished out. Because on December 20th, 1862, and later in the Los Angeles Star, his hometown paper, they published glowing accounts of his service. Northeast L.A., where his family lived, you can still find Johnson Street, Hancock Street, and Griffin Avenue, named for Albert and his kin. Albert was first buried in Islands, but in 1866, the Texas legislature passed a resolution. Said, bring that boy right back to Texas State Cemetery in Austin. That's where he belongs.
Which indeed, they reburied him there in 1867. Then, 1905, the state hired sculptor Elizabeth Ney to create a monument and statue for his gravesite, which still stands today.
Cool. It's Texas.
Right.
Well, it's Austin. So.
Right. Yeah. The Texas Historical Commission also put up a marker near the entrance to what used to be Albert's plantation. And another one nearby was set up at the San Jacinto chapter of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas.
Okay.
And the Lee, Roberts, and Davis chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Cool.
All right, cool.
1916, University of Texas at Austin honored Albert and other rebel veterans with statues on the South Mall. But as you were to guess, in August 2017, during the push to remove Confederate monuments across the country, statue came down. The plan was to move it to the Briscoe Center for American History on the east side of campus. In 1980, Albert was inducted. Okay, so I guess they never moved it, or that was the plan.
That's the plan.
Wow. Going back to 1980, Albert was inducted into the Texas Military Hall of Honor. That's a good nod to his legacy.
Right.
By the fall of 2018, some schools named after him and other Confederate figures got new names. A.S. Johnston Elementary in Dallas became Cedar Crest, and Johnston Middle School in Houston was renamed to Meyerland.
Look at this shit. It's Johnston Middle School.
I know. 3 other elementary schools tied to Confederate veterans were also renamed at the same time. That's so stupid.
What are you going to do? I mean, technically traitors.
Yeah, that's true, I guess.
So, that was Albert Sidney, another life cut short. His life wasn't cut short, though. He was pretty old when
he was like 60, 70 or something, wasn't he? It was in the 50s.
He was born in 1803. He was 61.
Right.
So, I mean, good for him.
Right.
He didn't have to go, but he didn't. He just decided to be a traitor when he could just stayed in L.A. and lived his life.
Could have been
would have died from polio.
Could have been a traitor of other sorts.
Right. Probably would have died from smallpox or some shit down the line, So, A.S. Johnson, Albert Sidney, the highest ranking general ever to die in battle for still America. So, yeah, that's him. There's another what if Stonewall, what if Jeb, what if? Well, he died pretty later, but these Stonewall and him, if they wouldn't have died so soon, who knows what would happen? But
you ain't getting
what ifs?
Yep.
With that, we'll be back next week for maybe we'll cover Don Carlos Beale. His name was brought up a couple times in this episode.
He was a Don.
He was a Don. Either way, we're back probably for another Union guy, unless we can find an interesting story outside of that. But we'll be back anyways for
some sort of train robbery or something, right?
Involving the war.
Yeah,
maybe.
Sure.
We'll be back next week for more behind the battles of this American Civil War. We have the mother music. Bang, bang.